I have one last question for you. I think you're a very brave person. Are you a conscientious person?
No.
But
No, listen, Gordon. Really, if you want to get to the truth, forget the word conscience and forget the word shame.
I can't
Always try to peel away all that literary stuff. And when you get down to the most base and simple motivations, that's when those motivations will be the real and genuine ones. By the way, I think that it's not about me being brave. It's not about me lacking any conscience. But I absolutely cannot and do not agree with someone like Putin telling me how I should think.
But that's exactly what conscience is. You can't be at odds with yourself.
No, that's all just lofty literary talk as well. I simply want to say what I want to say, and I don't intend to justify it to anyone. I've been fortunate enough to avoid receiving either American or Ukrainian grants. The Americans were convinced that the Ukrainians were paying me. The Ukrainians were convinced that the Americans were paying me. And I managed to slip through in the happiest way possible. So I don't depend on anyone and absolutely don't have to align myself with anyone.
Slip through. I always remember Leonid Makarovich Kravchuk, about whom they used to say he could walk between the raindrops, between the little drops. Yes, do you know that joke? Once he and I actually walked out of a building together. It's raining, I take out an umbrella and say, Leonid Makarovich, let me. He says, no, I walk between the raindrops. That's how it is in life. But I'm talking about something else. We have a lot of young people watching us. Our audience is very young, and many boys and girls, Yami, simply because of their age, don't know that. In the 80s, already in the 80s, Uncle Sasha was a mega popular person in the Soviet Union. The program he did, 600 seconds. Well, it was incredible, especially after those long years of stagnation. I mean, it was hard to find anyone more popular. And your popularity, you never lost it in all the years that followed. By the way, you were a deputy in the State Duma of Russia 4 times. 4 times? You were also Putin's trusted representative at one time, it would seem. Just live and be happy. You have everything. You're a respected person. You have property, money, admirers, and popularity. So just enjoy it. No, you got up just as you were. Took your family, left everything behind, moved away, and now you speak your mind, you stand up against things. I take my hat off to you. Well, maybe not literally, but I do so in my mind. I truly admire you. I'm not saying this with any false pathos. I truly admire people who simply cannot remain in such inner discomfort. I understand this very well. I understand your motivation, but only a handful of people are capable of acting this way, and it's good to be among those few. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to ask you something. You knew Putin well. I imagine, well, Putin looked at you from the bottom up for a period of 600 seconds. I understand that. And when you were fighting with Sobchak, really fighting, he was Sobchak's deputy. So I understand that you knew Putin well during his Leningrad period, his St. Petersburg period, and you knew him later as well. You were one of Putin's trusted representatives. In other words, you know Putin. You've already dissected him like a little frog more than once. What advice could you give him today in the situation he has gotten himself into?
So let's be correct and careful, okay? The thing is, people are changeable creatures. And it's one thing to talk about a person before they've been placed, for example, in a nuclear reactor. And it's a completely different story when it's a person who has spent several hours in the most unpleasant zone of that nuclear reactor. And today's Putin has very little in common, aside from some facial features, speech patterns, and behavioral quirks, with the Putin we all knew, and who, frankly, was absolutely not this scum, absolutely was not.
He was not.
Today's evil spirits. Or maybe he was, as you say, repeatedly dissected. It would never have even occurred to me to take the Putin of that time seriously or to consider him as some kind of phenomenon. He actually presented himself, by the way, in an extremely modest and self-deprecating manner. That was the style of the St. Petersburg Security Service guys, and no one saw him as, well, let's put it this way. People had a decent opinion of him, but no one took him seriously. He was seen only as some kind of extension of Sobchak, someone you could poke or squeeze a little. And then Sobchak would respond. Back then, by the way, Putin actually expressed and held quite a lot of reasonable, liberal, and free-thinking ideas. He was crippled. He was crippled by historicism. He was crippled by Russia. I keep telling everyone, guys, Russia is not the name of a country. It's the name of an apparatus of violence.
It's a diagnosis.
It's the name of an apparatus of violence. A diagnosis is something entirely different. Unfortunately, it's the name of evil, the name of war. Not because it has become this way now. It has no other historical function except for occupation and parasitism. There just isn't. She had nothing. It entered the European world as an adopted child when that European world had already taken shape. But what arrived was simply savages dressed up in European clothes because Peter treated his people like this, like an entertainer on the promenade who decides he needs to dress up his monkey Laponder because it's embarrassing to have a naked monkey, embarrassing to have a shaggy one. After all, when Russians talk about their uniqueness, about their Russian world, they should at least look around at the completely European architecture they somehow consider Russian, and at everything else as well. In other words, they have no grounds for their delusions of grandeur.
Well, yes.
In reality, just as Putin has no grounds today for his winner's tone. After all, everything that is happening in Ukraine, the heroism of Ukraine, the unimaginable courage, of course, and the incredible bravery, especially considering the overwhelming numerical superiority of Putin's troops. What is happening is truly a mortal disgrace for the Russian army. This is already a defeat. Yes, if it had all ended, if he had done it in a week or two, or even in a month, he could have looked like Timur, Genghis Khan, or Roland. But no, now, it's all over. That train has left the station.
What would you say to him? What kind of eunuch? Where to?
You see, it's completely pointless. A professor, a doctor never argues with a patient. I would have nothing to say to him. There would be nothing to say to him, and he himself would never dare to have that conversation now. He really isn't suited for conversations with any opponent, whether it's staged, rehearsed, filtered through every possible screen. Oh, he simply isn't capable of speaking. No, the only honest advice I could give him is to exile himself. That's the only thing. Of course, that's a rather humane suggestion, but still there's no other option. Discussing his hallucinations with him is just as absurd. Korsakov, the classic of Russian psychiatry, wrote that even if I were paid a huge amount of money, I would never discuss with patients the shade of hair of the fairies they imagine under their beds.